Stop funding your own servitude. 10K in the bank pays you $2 a day. That's a joke. But at 100K, the math finally hires a second version of you. Stop being the fuel. Level up. Imagine standing in this freezing room. You are pouring every ounce of your physical health, your cognitive bandwidth, and your finite time into pulling these two cables together. You've reached the $50,000 mark. The ends are inches apart. You see a few pathetic orange sparks, maybe $2 a day in market returns. You think you're halfway to the light? You're wrong. In the physics of connectivity, 90% of a circuit is 100% of a blackout. This isn't an isolated struggle, it's a systemic pandemic. The 2026 economy is not designed to reward your effort, it is designed to harvest it. While you strain to bridge that gap, a silent liquidation protocol is already moving against you. It's in the 2.7% core inflation that renders your safe savings account a depreciating liability. It's in the decay of the median professional salary. It is the ghost in the machine, that invisible friction you feel every time you check your balance and realize you've run 5 miles just to stay in the same place. You are currently being farmed for your inertia. Every second you remain parked at the $50,000 mark, you aren't just stagnant, you are a pass-through entity for corporate revenue. You are the fuel for a system that relies on your failure to reach the arc. The liquidation protocol is not a distant threat. It is a mechanical pressure, currently tightening around your throat, waiting for the precise second you decide that 90% of a connection is good enough to stop. The reason this trap works is because it's built on a foundation you've been taught to trust. We are operating on legacy code. You've been told that slow and steady wins the race, that if you just divert 10% of your paycheck into a diversified mutual fund, the horizon will eventually meet you. This advice isn't just outdated. In the 2026 landscape, it is a systemic liability. This model was perfected in the 1990s, a period of relative commodity stability and predictable labor markets. Back then, the milestone we're discussing was a finish line. Today, it is barely a starting block. Consider the decay of purchasing power. In 1998, $100,000 carried the weight of a functional legacy. But look at the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Because of the compounding erosion of the dollar, $100,000 in 1998 is the mathematical equivalent of roughly $200,000 today. The hurdle hasn't just stayed in place, the gravity has doubled. While you are sprinting toward that six-figure mark, the finish line is being moved backward by a currency that is actively losing its utility. This is the failure of the safe path. When you follow the 10% rule, you are operating in the principal dominance phase. In plain English, your growth is entirely dependent on your manual labor. Your money is dormant. It's not working for you, it's just sitting there, losing value to the very system that encouraged you to save it. Every safe dollar you put away is currently being liquidated by a subscription-era machine that views your disposable income as excess inventory. While you focus on the small wins, skipping a coffee or using a coupon, the architecture is scaling your fixed costs at a 1-to-1 ratio with your raises. Your rent, your digital access, your mobility are being metered. You think you are building a safety net? No. Without the specific velocity required to reach the arc, your savings are merely a prepaid subsidy for the very entities that own the assets you're trying to buy. You aren't accumulating wealth, you are simply managing the rate of your own depletion. Your hard-earned surplus is not a foundation for your freedom. It is the low-cost bridge you are building for the very machine that intends to keep you on the wrong side of the river. The mechanism of your confinement is not a wall. It is a mathematical filter. It is a cold, calculating architecture known as the Subscription-Era Liquidation Protocol. This system isn't evil in the way we traditionally understand it. It is simply performing the precise function it was designed for, the systematic extraction of your potential. Most people fail to see the trap because it operates on the illusion of a level surface. You believe that as you climb the corporate ladder, your proximity to freedom increases. But the floor you are walking on is actually tilting by 1 degree every month. It is a surface designed to feel flat, while it quietly directs your trajectory toward a predetermined outcome. This is the hidden structural rot of the modern economy. The protocol views your disposable income as excess inventory that must be cleared out. It ensures that your slow descent isn't a failure of your character, it is a fundamental feature of your environment. The trap triggers at a very specific blind spot, the compounding compression curve. This is the missing piece of the puzzle. The system knows that during the first 7 years of your journey, your effort is mathematically inefficient. It relies on the fact that you cannot see the arc because you are too busy staring at the incline. To understand the gravity of this, you have to look at the raw data of the slog. If you are starting from zero and contributing $1,000 every single month into a standard 7% return vehicle, it will take you exactly 88 months of perfect execution just to reach the 6-figure threshold. Take a second. Do the math. Those 7.33 years represent the most dangerous phase of your life. During this period, 96% of your portfolio's growth is derived solely from your physical labor. The system is waiting for you to hit the boring middle, the point where you've sacrificed for 5 years but still haven't seen the physics of wealth take over. It wants you to look at your balance, realize it won't even buy a modest home, and decide that the sacrifice is futile. The liquidation protocol does not profit from your absolute destruction. It profits from your perpetual, managed struggle. It needs you to remain functional enough to continue producing value, but just liquid enough to pay for the recurring liabilities it rents back to you. Your hard work is not a pathway to sovereignty. It is the primary resource the architecture consumes to maintain its own stability while you are kept in a state of managed functionality.
We have arrived at the source code of your frustration. To understand why your effort feels mathematically useless, you must visualize the structure of the unfinished circuit. Imagine you are gripping the cold, metallic ends of the cable with everything you have. The air in this room is thin. Every breath you take is a unit of your youth. At the $50,000 mark, you have pulled these cables closer than they have ever been. You can feel the electrostatic hum. You are exhausted, but the room remains freezing, and the giant bulb above you is a dead, hollow shell. The reason you are still in the dark is not a lack of willpower. It is a failure to account for the mathematical moat. This is the invisible friction. This formula is the security system of the owner class. It dictates that in the early stages, the principle, your manual labor, is the only thing that exists. If we look at the variables, P is your sweat, R is the market's return, but notice the exponent, N. This is time. In plain English, for the first several years, the math is actively working against you. If N represents the years you've spent straining in this dark room, then the formula is the resistance that keeps the ends of the cables apart. At the $50,000 plateau, the heat you are generating through your struggle is actually being absorbed by the machine. I know this math is dense. I know it feels like I'm describing a wall you can't climb. You might even feel that familiar urge right now to just look away, to click into something that makes you feel better. But you have to realize that failing to understand this specific friction means remaining a permanent victim of the liquidation protocol. If you don't grasp the cold logic of the moat, You will spend the rest of your life as a battery, providing the charge for someone else's arc while you stay in the cold. The physics of failure are absolute. In this dark room, harder work is a myth. When you increase your effort inside a low-torque environment, you aren't creating light, you are just creating more friction. And friction generates heat. In this architecture, that heat only strengthens the trap by liquidating your energy before it can ever reach the arc. The secret isn't to pull harder, it's to understand that the very physics of this dark room, the very thing causing your pain, is the only mechanism that can be used for your liberation. You don't need to break the circuit, you need to invert its polarity. You aren't trying to pull the ends together, you are trying to reach the precise density where the electromagnetic force takes over and completes the weld for you.
In the physics of wealth, $50,000 is mathematically closer to zero than it is to 100,000. To a brain wired for linear progress, this sounds like a glitch. 50 is the halfway point to 100, right? Wrong. In an exponential system, this is the inequality of progress. The first $50,000 requires 70% of your total labor energy. The final $50,000 requires only 30. Until you cross the six-figure seal, you are operating in a low-torque environment where your sweat is being liquidated by a 1-to-1 labor-to-dollar ratio. To understand how this math functions in the physical world, we have to look at the post-mortem of a career that hit the wall. Meet Jessie. At 30, she is a senior educator. For 7 years, she followed the rules. She worked 2 jobs, she skipped vacations, and she maintained the discipline of an aggressive saver. She reached the $50,000 plateau. She was holding the cables inches apart, straining in the dark. Then, the boring middle set in. Every morning, Jessie would check her brokerage account and see her $50,000 earn exactly $2 in market returns. At the same time, she watched her 2026 rent spike by 12%. She began to listen to the cultural noise, the narrative that 100,000 isn't what it used to be, that the slog was a fool's errand. She decided that 90% of a connection was a failure. She succumbed to financial nihilism. She stopped her contributions. She decided to finally live in the moment. 2 years later, the collision occurred. Her father required a $30,000 emergency surgery. In a functioning capital owner scenario, this would be a manageable hurdle, but Jessie was trapped under the institutional quality multiplier. Because she had stopped at the $50,000 mark, she was invisible to the high-level tools of the financial architecture. Major institutions like Charles Schwab or Raymond James maintain a strict floor for SBLOCs, Securities-Based Lines of Credit. These tools, which allow an owner to borrow against assets without selling a single share, typically require a minimum pledged asset base of $100,000. Jessie had no access to institutional liquidity. To save her father, she was forced to liquidate her entire portfolio. Because she sold during a market dip, she locked in her losses. Because the assets were in a taxable account, she triggered a massive capital gains bill. In 48 hours, 7 years of labor were erased. Jessie didn't lose $50,000. She lost the next 30 years of her life. By stopping at the halfway point, she possessed zero temporal resilience. She had built a bridge that consumed all her resources, but provided zero utility when the storm arrived. The post-mortem is clear. Jessie didn't fail because of a lack of effort. She failed because she remained in the labor-only class, governed by a source code pre-calibrated for the harvest of anyone who stops before the arc.
It is time for a brutal diagnosis. Your inability to cross the six-figure threshold is not a failure of character. It is a biological win for the system. The gap between knowing what you must do and actually doing it is not a void you've created. It is a space that has been colonized. The architecture leverages your survival neurochemistry to anchor you at the systemic breaking point. It utilizes a phenomenon known as hyperbolic discounting. In plain English, your brain is hardwired to value a $10 dopamine hit today over a $100,000 arc a decade away. This isn't a defect, it's an ancient survival mechanism. But in the 2026 economy, this instinct is being harvested. Every time you reward yourself for a hard week of work by liquidating your surplus, you aren't being soft. You are simply responding to a pre-programmed biological prompt. The protocol provides you with a false exit. It feeds you just enough dopamine through meaningless, small wins like managing a digital subscription to keep you compliant. This busy work is designed to make you feel like you are moving while ensuring you never achieve escape velocity. It keeps you in a state of high-activity stagnation. Your perceived lack of willpower is actually the intended outcome of the environment. The machine does not want you to reach the arc. It wants you to remain a high-functioning sensor that reacts perfectly to every stimulus it provides. It wants your stress, your impulses, your reactive spending. It needs them to fuel its quarterly earnings. To understand the scale of this farming, look at the data of the global landscape. The system hides the reality of PPP arbitrage from you because it needs you anchored in the high-cost grid. It needs you to believe that your $50,000 is nothing, so you will spend it. But look at the silence in the data. In 2026, $1 holds the local purchasing power of $27.58 in an emerging hub like Dhaka, Bangladesh. Take a second. In the eyes of the machine, you are merely a resource to be managed. The protocol consumes your emotional reaction, your frustration, your impulse, your guilt. These are the data points it uses to calibrate your next distraction. But the system has no defensive response to a move made in cold, non-reactive alignment with the math of the arc. You must cease being a sensor that reacts to the environment. You must become a silent sequence of code that moves through the grid without leaving a trace for the harvest.
Stop. Breathe. The noise is fading. The grinding of the gears, the digital hum of the subscriptions, the weight of the cables, it's all becoming background radiation. You've been a component in a machine that requires your blindness to function, but the primary power of the predator was its invisibility. Once you see the mechanism, the environment loses its grip. Awareness is not a feeling. It is a lethal weapon. You are no longer a passive resident of the dark room. You are an active counter-strategist. The system hasn't changed, but you have. You have moved from the board to the table. You've reached the point of no return. You cannot unsee the unfinished bridge. You cannot unlearn the law of the arc. The tactical silence that once triggered your paralysis has now become your greatest advantage. This is the empty space where the new blueprint begins. In the 2026 economy, your awareness has turned the machine's primary weapon into a terminal liability. You are no longer fueled by the dopamine of the harvest. You are fueled by the cold clarity of the threshold. The machine still expects you to react. It still expects you to stumble. But it is looking for a version of you that no longer exists. The transition is complete.
Once you have seen the source code, you can never go back to being a passive component of the blackout. You are now the only operator in the room with the light on.
The mystery of the dark room is solved. The answer was hidden inside the very math that once oppressed you. You don't change the laws of physics, you simply change how you interact with the gravity. To cross the final $50,000 and achieve the arc, we must deploy 3 specific countermeasures to neutralize the liquidation protocol. The first is the behavioral exploit. To defeat the biological hack, you must decouple your dopamine from the portfolio's balance. In the early stages, the market is too volatile to provide a reliable feedback loop. Instead, you track a metric the system cannot touch: cumulative deposits. You treat every dollar saved as a unit of experience in a game that only rewards consistency. By gamifying the input rather than the output, you neutralize the boring middle and maintain the torque required to reach the seal. The second is the structural bypass. You must recognize that the $50,000 plateau is the most lethal point in your trajectory. This is where the Diderot effect, the urge to upgrade your life to match your effort, is strongest. To navigate this, you implement a mandatory waiting period for every non-essential expense. You treat every raise not as an invitation to consume, but as a mechanical acceleration of your escape velocity. The third and final countermeasure is the master key: institutional liquidity. This is the secret bypass the owner class uses to stay wealthy, while the labor class liquidates. The data is absolute. Major institutions like Charles Schwab and Raymond James maintain a systemic floor. Once you cross the $100,000 threshold, you unlock access to an SBLOC, a securities-based line of credit. In plain English, you can borrow against your wealth at interest rates often 5 points lower than a standard loan without selling a single share. You gain the power to handle life's emergencies without ever touching your compounding engine. You stop being a victim of the market's timing and start being its operator. This is the transition to strategic immunity. You are no longer fighting the protocol. You are reappropriating its power to fuel your own trajectory. Now, look at the ledger of your own life. How much more of your youth are you willing to liquidate just to stay parked at the $50,000 plateau? Too comfortable to be desperate, but too poor to ever be free. The counters have been set. The blueprint is in your hands. The optimization of your future is no longer a matter of hope. It is a matter of cold, non-reactive execution.
The decisions made today do not settle within the month. They resonate across the next 10-year horizon. Correct application of the ARC today fundamentally restructures the landscape of 2036. One path leads to a decade of systemic decay, a slow, calculated liquidation of your physical capacity and your mental bandwidth. The other leads to a state of permanent immunity and strategic sovereignty. You have moved beyond the status of a passive resident within the darkroom. You have transitioned into the definitive role of a sovereign principal. Your perspective is no longer governed by the immediate dopamine of a recurring paycheck. It is governed by the generational physics of the accumulation curve and the reality of escape velocity. But identification of the predator is only the first phase of the strategic engagement. It is not enough to simply understand the circuit. You must account for the current that flows through it. If the very unit of account you are laboring for is a dissolving phantom, then the bridge you are building is anchored in shifting sand and systemic debt. The iron door that was unlocked in 1971 is finally beginning to close, and the exit points for the labor class are becoming increasingly narrow with every passing ledger entry.
We have mapped the bridge. Now we must analyze the accelerating instability of the floor beneath us. We must dismantle the energy source of the centrifuge itself. The system is a predatory centrifuge that harvests the stationary. But the math of the arc remains a cold, unyielding sanctuary for the kinetic.